Hey there, fortune seekers. So, you've designed a game. Good for you. Have you made sure the game is balanced? Made it equally fun for everybody at the table? Can one of your gifted friends count the cards and decide their strategy based on that? Are players rewarded for dirtling? Why don't we get into the weeds on that? Because designing a game is only the beginning. Game balance is the true mountain to climb. So let's talk. This and so much more on today's episode of the Moth Studios Super Secret Podcast. Shh! Don't tell anybody about it. You got that? Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm your host, desiring super strength to get away with being hella rank, Joel Watts, joined as always by my friend.
Danny, really enjoying some Danish cookies.
And on last week's episode, we discussed the possible fall of Magic the Gathering and those games looking to step in and pick up the shedding player base. If you want to hear more about that or the dozens of other topics that we've delved into, then be sure to follow us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And while you're there, why don't you rate and review us? 5 stars only. But today we're going to delve into what we have learned about the process of balancing our game, X Seekers of Fortune, and how you can approach balancing your games. But before we get into that, Danny, are you ready for the question of the week?
Nope.
I never are.
Yep.
Well, too bad.
Okay.
I'm now the dictator of this podcast, and we
You always
will
have been.
do the question of the week.
Emphasis on the dick.
Yes. Hey, just note that your cookie eating was marked down in your permanent record.
I bet. Apologies
right.
to everyone who had to eat me chewing cookies in their ears.
All right, Danny. Well, subordination is required because spooky season is
subordination.
Yeah.
Okay. Is subordination the opposite of insubordination?
I assume so, unless there's pro-insubordination or something like that.
I don't know. I mean, this is something that we probably should Google, but we won't. Because we're trying to have faster podcasts, right? We're trying to get tighter podcast times.
Yeah, and we're doing a bang-up job of it so far this week. So, with spooky season upon us, what has been your favorite Halloween costume in the past? Like, what was a banger that you just really pulled together for Halloween?
Look, I don't think that my mind is a little fuzzy. I will say when I was a kid, I had a really sweet Ninja Trolls costume that like a neighbor made for us. And it was really cool. But I want to talk about something else. So when I was a kid, I really loved hobos, like the idea of being a hobo. I thought like being a hobo was like a really cool thing.
Yeah.
And one year I decided I wanted to be a hobo for Halloween. And I remember showing up to this lady's door and I knocked on the door and she was like, "And what are you supposed to be?" And I was like, "I'm a hobo." And she's like, "You're a jerk." And I'm like,
What?
And then she closed the door and didn't give me candy.
What? What? I mean, maybe I understand post like 2010 that maybe being a unacceptable costume, but you're talking like the 1980s or early 90s being a hobo, that was still acceptable back then. What was this? You have nothing else. This is awesome.
I don't. To this day, I don't really understand. Maybe she had like some weird encounter. Maybe her dad was like a hobo riding the rails and like, was never home. And she was just like, it brought up some bad memories. And she saw a child and saw her father. I don't know.
Yeah. Also, I mean, if you nailed the costume, she shouldn't have had to ask you what you are. That's a pretty standard. You had the bushel, like the bushel with the stick. Maybe
I mean, I assume so. I mean, look, I don't really remember too much beyond my early 20s. So
I think that's where you and I differ. I think my memory is like almost more crystal clear than most people. At least like for my childhood, it's like only the past few years that have become a blur to me. That is very interesting, and please put your personal feelings and personal politics aside. If the child is young, just roll with it. Don't be slamming doors in kids' faces.
Is there a costume that you would slam a door in a kid's face for?
There's costumes that I would give the parents a solid 4.
But
And
you wouldn't deprive the child of candy.
probably not. I will just say for the listener, I made the Forrest Whitaker eye at the camera. Kind of the people's eyebrow. A cocked glance, I guess you would say, at the parents. But no, I think kids, for the most part, kids don't know better until certain ages and certain education points. So I don't think they should necessarily be punished. But it definitely, I can think of a few, but I would say that it would almost be parody for those people, for those costumes to see my front door. But I have to be honest, I've been an apartment dweller for a long time. I don't get trick-or-treaters. I can't remember the last time I got trick-or-treaters. So I haven't seen that many costumes. I'm not sure what the kids are wearing these days. Do they get Fortnite costumes with Fortnite dances? Probably.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you can bleep that.
Yes, your child.
Yeah, my son. He did some Fortnite costuming the other year. Also, those Danish cookies were definitely expired, so they're very stale. Really regretting eating one of those.
Well, I will say your commitment to the bit is definitely going on your permanent record, so that might balance things out.
This will I get a little more subordination.
Yes, sir.
All right. What is your spooky costume of choice?
Well, I'm not much of a spooky. I have to admit this. I am going to go with something spooky this year. In fact, you might be seeing it in the next few weeks. But in general, in years past, I'm trying to do the clever costume thing. So I will say, when it comes to my favorite adult costume that I've had, I one year cut a T-shirt like just at my navel, or like above my stomach, I guess, like a high rib cage. It basically looked like a what is the
high
term?
Rib cage.
A midriff T-shirt. It was even worse than a midriff. I mean, trust me, if I was a lady, I would have been giving people a show.
That was the whole costume.
And then and this is lazy. This is like last minute lazy. I wrote on the shirt. It was a white T-shirt, so I took a black felt tip pin to it and put like a little loading bar and like it said shirt loading.
Oh, that lady would have definitely called you a jerk.
Rightfully so. But I think I was just looking for an excuse to show off my goods. I'm like nearly it's not voyeur. Voyeur watches. I'm an exhibitionist. I'm nearly an exhibitionist. But I will say,
what's the opposite of a peeping Tom? A showing Tom?
Yeah, I will say. Hey, I had to. My partner, or we had to put up a window like blocker, because she is just so paranoid about people looking in through the windows, and I'm personally like, I have no qualm. I'll walk across my living room with an open window and be completely in the nude. I'm not going outside like, down the supermarket like that. But if I'm in my house, if somebody's looking in, that's on them.
That's an interesting theory.
Yeah. If they want a little show, they can come and get it.
All right. Well, I think in the interest of time and people's sanity, we should move off this topic.
That's fair. Ever dreamed of embarking on legendary quest, unlocking hidden secrets, and discovering untold riches? Dive into the world of X Seekers of Fortune. It's the game that's soon to be taking the internet by storm. Sign up today at xseekersoffortune.com and start your journey to greatness. Remember, fortune favors the bold. See you there. But that we should move on to the topic of discussion for the week, which we're discussing this week: game balance and balancing your game. I have to say, in general, this is kind of where the real getting in the weeds of making a good game comes in, because you would say, I think we would agree that the early process of designing the game went very fast. We made big decisions and jumped like miles at a time, getting miles ahead of ourselves at a time. But once we got like all those big decisions made and the design more or less sorted out, then you're actually able to start seeing, how do the mechanics relate to each other? What is like the currency exchange? In our game, we're a resource management game. So what do all like this resource like leads? What does that equate to for adventures? And what does that equate to for Action X cards? How do they relate to each other? And so there was a big, many months worth of discovery that I will say we are still in some ways going through. So I just wanted to, have us talk through our experience with the whole balancing, design and some of the lessons we've learned from it, and hopefully pass along some details that you can use in your game design.
That sounds like a balanced approach.
Yeah. So the way I did this one is I found a couple of wise people, so wise that some of these folks are unknown, and found some things they had to say about game balance. And I thought we could just kind of bounce off of those and react to them.
Didn't we agree that any unknown quotes would just be attributed to you?
Well, I mean, I think that's pretty, yeah. No, I completely blanked there. I thought I was going to have something in the tank, but no, I did not.
You don't normally come up empty, but every now and then it balances out.
I think my roommate's cooking something, and the smell's like kind of, making my circuitry go off because I didn't realize how hungry. No, in a good way, in a good way, in the sense of like, I am now hungry for food. It's not like
first week in the apartment and you're already like dissing your roommate on the podcast. That would be a terrible story.
I'm not dissing.
He's like, I'm totally you should check out my podcast.
This is on me because I didn't eat before we started, because I get in the weeds of work and then I forget to eat, and then all of a sudden we start recording the podcast and I realize how hungry I am. But well, to get back to the starting quote, to get us started on this, I love this one. In game design, balance is the art of making sure every choice is meaningful and no single option dominates the rest. And this has been probably one of the biggest sticking points in development for us, like where we really feel like we hit we find a thorn in our like our perfectly sanded box, and then we find a splinter. These are our splinters, because we've had at least two examples of this that have gone to. Sorry, we've had at least two examples of this that have gone on to require us to make major overhauls to the game. Do you remember those, Danny?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the times it's had to do with dig within and breakthrough. Mm-hmm. And I mean, to a lesser extent, infiltrate. But ultimately, just tying this back into the quote real fast. I mean, I think that one of the things that we're really trying to do is make sure that it isn't obvious to the players that there's just one strategy you should do all the time. Because if you have a lot of things your players can do, but there's only one thing that would ever really make sense strategically to do, your game is out of balance. And, I think that's what Soren's saying in the quote is, you want to make sure that no single option dominates the rest. You want to make sure that there's a variety of actions that might make sense. They're different paths that might reach the ultimate goal of winning the game, achieving whatever objective they're trying to achieve. But if it's obvious that this is what you should do, at that point, you're not playing a game. You're more or less on rails, right?
Yeah. And that, which was an early complaint, or the earliest note that we received about our game was, it feels like it's on rails. It feels like I'm not making decisions. I'm just doing whatever is delivered upon me based on random draws.
100%. If you feel like you draw the cards and the cards tell you how to play the game, and all you're doing is using your hands to facilitate the movement of the cards and or pieces, if that's what your game includes, then your players are not going to feel like they have any agency. And it's hard to feel like you're having fun if you don't feel like it really matters that you were there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. If you just... I mean, there are some games, and this is something to very much consider in your game making process, is certain games actually do, thrive with random factors, with luck factors. Like, that's actually the fun. That's like the fun button that you press and seeing like all the fireworks go off, if you will, in different ways. Our game isn't like that. Our game is very strategic. You need to be making decisions that you feel impact the overall game state. And when we got that feedback that we don't have enough options, we don't have enough, ways of playing the game in that first play test that we did pretty much a year ago at this point. Would you say like we're coming up on a year of that play test?
Yeah. I mean, it would have been within 4 weeks of today, I would guess 4 to 6 weeks of today. We are talking about the very first play test of X Seekers of Fortune.
Yeah. Back when it was called Lost Arts. And yeah, that was a big, okay, this is the problem to solve, because we know we don't want people to say that they're just, on rails. We're not that kind of game.
Yep, tying this back to the question that you asked at the top of the discussion about, instances where we've experienced that. There were times where we felt like, because of breakthrough, because of dig within, it was absolutely correct to just fall behind, to lose. We've talked about this a lot on the show, so I don't think we need to go into the details of it. But that's an indication that you have a balancing problem. And we can talk a little bit about how we remedied those things, but ultimately we need to de-incentivize, and we've talked about incentives before, certain strategies enough such that you are weighing your options and it isn't clear exactly what is going to be most beneficial. You are having to make your own decisions, draw your own conclusions, and implement your own strategy. It doesn't feel like the game is suggesting there's one very, very good way to proceed and the rest are not viable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's why I would say design is often about getting your reps in, because these are strategies that were always available, are pretty much always available to you from when the game was first like baked up. It's just, it took us months of playing the game and trying different things, and for especially you as like a spikier player to look for, think through the game and find the best way to win consistently, for us to discover that we had this, what we called winning from behind problem. And, that's why when you hear stories about games, I mean, we're coming up on our first year of X Secrets of Fortune being a game in some form or another. And this is a prime example of why it takes a lot of playtesting, a lot of eyes on something, So I would say balancing is often about going down every conceivable avenue and seeing how far they can take you, and seeing how much they stretch and morph the game.
Yep, 100%. I think that ultimately, every time you're doing a playtest, you need to be paying attention to the decisions you're making and why you're making them. You need to be looking at the outcomes of those games and saying, was this very, very similar to a previous game? How much variability is there in gameplay? All of those things are going to factor into replayability, because ultimately people are not going to stick around in an unbalanced environment very long. It becomes very, very clear how the game is broken in an unbalanced environment, and people, it's like water finds its level, right? People will find where the game is broken eventually, if they have a mindset to do so. And that mindset is simply, truly being competitive and truly wanting to win.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say, in a competitive game, you will eventually find the best way to win. If it's the best way to win always, that's when it's a problem. Especially with what we had, because it would have, if two players, I don't know how much experimenting we did with this, but if two players both know the strategy that's optimal, you would be looking at just a very long, drawn out, dirtling game, because both players would be trying to be in the losing position the entire game, basically fighting for last place. And I can't imagine how boring that would have been to watch if we were ever to try to stream our game and have two players play in that style.
At the same time, it's very careful, and this is again where the balancing act comes in. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We really felt like it was important for our game to have a mechanic that allowed people to catch up from behind, and it could have been very easy to have a gut reaction and say, okay, if you give people this tool, it is a degenerate strategy. They only do this. We made the mistake. Let's get rid of it all and just have the game function without a catch-up mechanic. But instead, we said, okay, let's tune the dial. Let's turn the temperature down on this a little bit. Let's turn the temperature up, nerfing and buffing, right? Everything is turning dials. Don't overcorrect. Don't, just make small corrections until you get the desired result. If you try to change too much, if you try to change too drastically, you're not really going to learn exactly what the sweet spot is. And you want to find the sweet spot, because that's where your players are going to find the most interesting decisions.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and that might actually bring us to our second quote that I think goes really well with your dials. And we often talk about the dials, but I think you, as a fine cook that you are, might appreciate this one. Balancing a game is like crafting a recipe. Too much of one ingredient can ruin the dish. This is from Unknown. And I should say, for the record, I think I forgot to credit the one quote that I have that's actually from somebody was the first quote I read, and it's from Soren Johnson, who was
Who's Soren Johnson?
he was a game designer for Civilization. Pretty
Oh,
big, yeah. I know.
yeah.
I learned
I
about that
love
today.
Civilization.
Yeah, it's a wonderful series, and I think a lot of people are inspired to try to make Civilization. To me, is like a board game on your computer, and I think a lot of people try to reverse engineer it to try to make a version of Civilization that is just a board game. And so I think it's a wonderful thing, like kind of going through the looking glass like that. But yeah, so this idea that balancing is like a recipe and you don't want too much of one ingredient because it can outweigh the dish. When I hear that, the thing I thought first and foremost about was the two primary ingredients for a lot of games, which is the balance between luck and skill.
Yep. That is a huge dichotomy that needs to be well balanced during the course of your game. And this is actually really interesting because we actually had another game designer come to us asking us about this today.
Mm-hmm.
They reached out to us and said, "Hey, I have a question about my game. Can you walk me through, your thoughts?" And the question basically boiled down to, I don't know how much luck versus how much skill I want to have in the game. Do I lean into being pure strategy, or should I include luck? I'm having a difficult time figuring this problem out. And what the conversation ended up becoming was a thought experiment where we said, okay, let's like forget about all the mechanics. Let's forget everything about your game.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how you want your players to respond. At the end of the game, if a player came up to you and said, that game ended because of luck and no other reason, and I don't like that, would you feel like you needed to change the game to accommodate them? Or would you feel like you needed to say, hey, I'm sorry, but this game involves some amount of luck. It may not be for you if this amount of luck is not, right for you. And he said, I would be fine telling them this is not your game if there's a certain amount of luck. And it's like, okay, so we've identified that, you want luck in the system in some amount. Would it be okay if 1 in 100 games, could you tolerate 1 in 100 games coming down to the game being decided by luck? Actually, where we started was with a coin flip. You flip a coin, 1 in 2 games. Would you be okay with it ending in luck? No. 1 in 6?
Mm-hmm.
No. Let's go to the other extreme. 1 in 100? I'm okay with that. 1 in 50? I could be okay with that. 1 in 20? Okay. What about 1 in 25? That sounds about right. That's 4%. That sounds low. What about 10%? Okay, 10%. So what he figured out was he actually was okay 1 in 10 games being decided by something that could be described as lucky. And then that established for him a guiding metric so that when he went back and looked at his game and started deciding how to start turning those dials on luck and skill, he knew if games started ending with luck due to randomness more than 10% of the time, that he was off base from his vision and needed to recalibrate.
Yeah, and we talked about that very early in the design process for X Seekers of Fortune when we started thinking like, where do we want this to feel? And we actually had the conversation. I think that something like 70% of games should feel like they were skill wins, and maybe 30% should feel like they were luck wins that squeaked out. But I also have the philosophy, especially in a card game, luck is something that happens to you along the way, and depending on how you react to your luck is sort of like determines how much you mitigate your luck. With skill is what determines if you're how solid of a player you are. Like you can get dealt, and I felt like I've gone through this in X Seekers of Fortune, getting dealt what you considered the worst hand, like not the adventures you want, not the Action X cards that really have a big impact on the game state as it is. It happens, and I still feel like I have like at least 1 or 2 example games in my mind where it wasn't going my way, but I still pulled it out. Now that said, we also had an example last night, I think at Tuesday Night X, which, reminder, if you haven't tried it out, why don't you come by Tuesday Night X on our Discord server. We all get together from 8 to 10 p.m. on Central Standard Time on Tuesdays to play the game and just talk about, games in general. We have a lot of talk about other, like board games, tabletop games, video games, and sometimes just life stuff. So come and hang out by the campfire.
We would
Tuesday
love to
nights.
have you hang out with us. I mean, we are very, very enthusiastic about having new folks out there. So don't hesitate.
For sure. But we had a pretty luck-centric game situation at this last Tuesday Night X. Would you want to walk us through that and explain why we liked the situation?
So the situation was that there was a relatively tight game that kind of came down to the final quest, as typically it does. One person was in the final quest, the other one was not. Anyone who pays attention to the game or has played the game quite a bit knows that there is a card called Temporal Backdoor. And what Temporal Backdoor says is that you can complete an adventure without paying its cost. And for those following along at home, completing adventures are the way you complete a victory point in our game. And if you get 5 victory points, you win the game. Mm-hmm. So this was the 5th and final adventure. And the player in question had Temporal Backdoor, which said that they could complete it without paying its cost, which effectively would mean that they had completed their 5th adventure and would win the game, except for Temporal Backdoor also has a rider that says, if you would win the game this way, you win the game at the beginning of your next turn instead, effectively giving your opponent 1 turn to respond, come back and win from beneath the Temporal Backdoor. So upon the playing of this card, their opponent, who's a relatively new player to the game, said, okay, well, that's it. I need to complete 2 adventures next turn. I'm not going to win. And we're like, no, you should play it out. You could win still. They're like, it's not going to happen. Like, I have to do 2 adventures. Eventually, we convinced them to take their turn because they just wanted to just concede.
Yeah.
And they took their turn.
They were kind of in table flipping mode almost. Like they were on the verge.
Maybe I don't know. That might be ready to flip a table.
Yeah, well, there's
but
no
I think
table.
they were just kind of like, guys, this is pointless. You're really going to make me. And so they played it out, and they had a couple. They had a couple of maneuvers. They had to use Dig Within to go a little deeper. They eventually found the leads they needed to complete their last adventure, which was a 3 to get into the final quest. And then they got into the final quest. They flipped up an adventure, and they drew exactly the leads they needed to complete that adventure, and they won.
A 3-cost adventure with 3 different leads on it, and they drew exactly those leads. And so they drew those open to the table for everybody to see one at a time, if I remember correctly. And I just glanced over because I was like, engaging with the chat and things like that. I glanced over. I'm like, he just top decked the win. In the final turn.
It's statistically improbable, and he did it. But he was the type of person who really wants to execute a strategy, play a strategic game, and wants to win on his own merit. And I think he felt like that was like a little, like he didn't feel like he won. He felt like the game ended in his favor and he had nothing to do with it. And that's a completely valid way to feel in that situation.
Yeah,
there's skill involved in playing to your outs and setting yourself up to experience luck. And maybe a player who's less experienced might not dig within, or there's a lot of different ways that skill can factor into getting to that point so that you have an opportunity to win. But at the end of the day, that feels like a lot of luck.
It does. But also, if that player, they had 3 adventures complete, and that meant they had a chance to win in that game. If they only had 2 adventures complete, that would have probably been a bridge too far. Like if they had to complete 3 adventures in 1 turn. So just the fact that they didn't let their rival.
Not impossible, though.
Not impossible. It's happened before. We've seen it. But we have. But the fact that they didn't let their rival get too far ahead of them. That's like one thing. Like you can durdle, and being behind has its advantages. But if your opponent or your rival gets too far ahead of you, at least in the game as it is now, you're going to have a hell of a time catching up. And they're going to just run away with the game if you don't advance your own game state. And that's what we like about the game, is that it's a race. It's a race to get to a certain number. And I think that was a great example of like, the odds can be in your favor. And as long as you've set yourself up, there's always a chance. And that temporal backdoor stipulation about winning on the next turn, that wasn't on the card originally, way back in the day. And I think it's turned into some of the most dramatic and fun game experiences, because very much like Magic the Gathering has had for a long time, here's the board state, win this turn. Like it's like a puzzle. And this card basically turns your game that you're playing right in front of you into that puzzle because it challenges you. You have to win now. If you pass your turn, you lose. So it kind of has that baked in Scry magazine, puzzle of the week.
Which in and of itself was a balancing exercise because you recognized when we had the card just say completing an adventure without paying its cost, that it was a very unsatisfying experience for both the person who won and the person who lost, because effectively they got lucky. They drew temporal backdoor and the game just ends on the spot. No one's playing anymore. The game is over. It's just basically a card that if played in the final quest says, I win.
Yeah.
And that's not a lot of fun. You're like, we need to add a layer to this. This can't be, I win. It needs to be more complicated than that. There needs to be some risk. And so now with the rider that says you win at the beginning of your next turn, we give your opponent an opportunity to win. And it also makes it to where you have to think through your strategy. Are you going to play temporal backdoor right now and not have any defenses up so that when they make their go at it, you can't interact with them? That's the thing, like there's a lot of next leveling that goes into it in preparation. And sometimes you miss it when you're first starting out because you don't really know the meta. You don't know the cards that could be there. I mean, last night's game, there was actually a card that would have won the game for the person who cast Temporal Backdoor, and they had it in their hand, and they used it earlier in the game on something less consequential. Had they held on to it like they had originally planned, maybe they would have won that game after all.
Yeah.
So it's complicated, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's important to make sure that you don't have, cards that just come down or game mechanics that just come down and say, this is what happens. No one has a chance to interact. There's no response. If it's something as consequential as ending your game.
Yeah, exactly. That's very well put, and I think that leads us into our next quote here that I think will expand on what you're saying right there, Danny, because you bring up a great point. In game design, balance isn't just about numbers; it's about creating a dynamic and engaging experience for players. Yet again, unknown. And this is something that I think you need to keep in mind because it's not just about what is fair; it's about what is fun. And what is fun is having certain experiences in the game world. You're trying to create something like I hope I'm using this word correctly, a facsimile of like a genre experience, often with your theme is strong. I mean, there are the abstract games out there, but even those, they are trying to create a sensation with you that feels like a story or a narrative. So
100%.
And I actually I'm going to try to recreate it here, but I sort of express one of my theories, if you don't mind indulging me, about, experience like this. And that is you can't go any higher kind of theory. So to explain that, I like to refer to The Hateful Eight, one of my favorite movie experiences. I don't know if it's like my favorite movie, but I saw it once in theaters and I had a blast. And halfway through that film, there's a wonderful, gripping scene with Samuel L. Jackson just turning the heat up in the scenario to the breaking point. You are like a lobster boiling alive by the time he is done with that scene. The entire audience is up here. And then some critics and other people I talked to said that, and then it like loses a lot of steam because it comes back from that scene with a scene that kind of plays like a previously on that you would see in a TV show, where it kind of just explains sort of like yada yada yadas, has a narrator explain what happens for the next hour of real time that's going on in the story. But I think Quentin Tarantino knew exactly what he was doing with that. He was bringing the audience down from that high. He had gotten them once. He had gotten them all the way to the peak once. If he were to try to push it any further, it would be diminishing returns, or he would kill people in the audience. They would just die from being just too excited and too tense. But he brings it down, he brings you back down. So that way, for the second half of the movie, he just sends you back up again. And since he's already kind of like, it's almost like stretching, since he's already had you stretch out and you're like how much tension you can feel, I think he was able to raise the roof higher. Another example I use for this is the song American Girl by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I don't know about you, but I feel like there's this, I noticed when I was formulating this opinion, I had heard the song again, and there's a point in the song that the song almost gets goofy. it just has a breakdown that sounds like, guys trying to play like, white dude R&B, and jam out for just a second. But that's because like the songs has like they want to do the build up in the chorus again, and they kind of need the audience to sort of reset from the first time they did it. So it's almost like you have to go through that valley. And so what I'm trying to say here is that when you have big tense experiences in your game, you're going to need a cool off section. And we have that in X Seekers of Fortune with the ability to thwart and counter thwart. So we have these thwart wars that are very similar to one of the coolest things in Magic the Gathering, which I think is the counterspell war. And in the counterspell war, people burn off a lot of resources and, for one big play usually, like, and it's almost like a showdown. And when that's all said and done, they're very resource light. The game is like in a completely different state. And it's the same thing in X Seekers of Fortune. I believe this happened last night with our new players because one thwart war in our game will make the players have to go through many turns of just drawing cards to build up their hands again, build up their arsenal. But I really like that because it kind of shows like you got into a down and out brawl with your rival, and now you're both kind of bruised and bleeding. You got to pick yourselves back up and kind of, dust yourselves off and, do some wound bandaging before you can move on.
Yeah. And part of the reason why that happened yesterday was they're new players. They don't know the value of the resources yet. They don't know what fights to pick, what fights to let go. The more experienced players that we have tend not to get into those thwart wars unless the outcomes are super consequential.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot more happen. But early on when your players are playing, they're testing the fences. So it makes sense that you'll see something like that. But your point is well taken. I think you just think about, when it's cold out and you touch something hot, it feels that much hotter. When it's hot out, you touch something cold, it feels that much colder. It's contrast that makes things feel richer. What is joy without pain, or pain without joy, right?
What's excitement without boredom?
Exactly.
Tedium. Yeah.
So well taken. I think that is perfectly put, and I definitely liked your laying out there of the Hateful Eight and Tom Petty. I think those are excellent examples.
Yeah, and go listen to American Girl if you haven't heard it in a while. It is an excellent song.
I would say watch the Hateful Eight, but depending on your taste, you may struggle with it.
I thought the Hateful Eight was I mean this in all compliments. I thought it was a perfect joke because by the end of the movie, I felt like it ended on just the perfect punchline, and I was just laughing all the way through the credits. I might be crazy. I should not have laughed at that time, but I do think that he set it up to be a long, almost a Shaggy Dog tale of a joke that ends in just the funniest ending you could imagine. Probably you couldn't imagine. But I do want to emphasize just to reiterate on this one. Remember, a game experience is a journey, and it is just as much a journey as a movie or a book that you're reading or a song you're listening to. There are, certain like parts of the hero's journey that you're trying to send your players through, and no matter what side of the table they sit on, they're going to think of themselves as the hero. So you want to kind of bake those into the experiences they're going to have along the way.
Absolutely. What's our next quote, Joel?
That's a good point.
Feed me a quote. I'm hungry.
I know. Well, I'm literally hungry. Like the sooner we get through this, the sooner I eat. Unless we want to eat on mic. If you want us to eat on mic, we can set up a Patreon.
I've already done that this episode.
That's true. You have. I'm surprised you're keeping it down.
Super regrettable.
Okay. Well, to get back to the quotes, to get us, to kind of keep us on track and refine us, balancing a game is an ongoing journey. As the players evolve, so should your game's balance. Unknown. And I think that this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, and maybe this will unlock some other thoughts, but the idea that, it took us months to get to people to be playing the game at such a level that we saw some of the faults that could have, that could cause high-level play to be a worse experience than we wanted.
Yeah, you actually see a lot of this in Magic the Gathering with drafting. They often say drafting is self-correcting or self-balancing. And part of the reason why is when you're talking about a metagame, there may be a strategy that's obvious and really, really good to pursue. But if everyone is doing it and there's a limited ability to execute that strategy based on available resources, Other strategies become more powerful by virtue of the fact that the resources required to execute them are more available, and the better strategies are more scarce. So you get a worse version of a better strategy or a better version of a worse strategy, and the better version of a worse strategy is sometimes better than the worst version of a better strategy. And so it's important to recognize that what is true right now in the current metagame or the current environment may not remain true. Another good way of thinking about this is just evolution in general, right? Adaptation itself is about how an organism faces an environment and whether they are fit to survive or not. And an organism that is able to, like, I think the example is of moths, right? Like at one point there was a moth that was, I'm going to say this wrong, but you'll get the gist. At one point there was a moth that was perfectly suited for its environment because it was white and the trees were white and it blended in and it would not be seen very easily by its predators. There was a coal factory that started producing energy not too far from this forest. The soot colored the trees black, and now all of a sudden the white moth is standing out. Its camouflage goes away. It's no longer well suited for its environment, so its strategy for survival becomes suboptimal. It suffers, intense predation, and this is exactly the story of ongoing balance. Things change, and you have to pay attention to how they're changing to determine what will make sense in the new environment.
For sure. And yeah, and that was the arms race we were worried about with the what win from behind style play is like, well, what happens when both players are trying to play that game? Would it have self-corrected? We did make changes before we got to see exactly to what depth that went to, but it is a good question. It's like, well, if both players decide to try to play from behind, does the player who tries to then just jump ahead end up winning the game?
Did not work out that way for us.
No, that's why we made changes. But I also think this is an important thing to consider, especially if you're a game designer who's either just starting out their game or like what we're going into right now, which is adding to our game, adding new mechanics, because we are designing our multiplayer expansion, and that is going to come with like completely new card types that we hadn't tried before. And so, and this is going back to the early phases of design and balancing, where you want to get things tested early because they might not work the way that you imagined them to work. And I highly recommend you think you have everything planned out until you actually sit down and have to try to explain your game to a person. It's that old boxing quote, everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face. Well, you getting punched in the face is you actually having to lay out a playing prototype and explain it to a friend and see if they actually can grasp it and if they have fun in front of you.
Yeah. And the last thing I would say on this topic is, I think along the lines of playtesting and balancing as you go, is if you make a change to your game one place, don't be surprised if it changes the way the game plays out in a different area, right? When we created Breakthrough, that changed the power of Dig Within, right? Mm-hmm. So anytime you make any sort of change of consequence, pay extra special attention to how it's rippling out, how it's cascading out throughout the system, and changing the viability of other strategies, mechanics, whatever, within your game, because you can't assume that changing one thing is not going to have an impact on the whole system. So it's important to just take constant inventory of how everything's working and pay attention to any time you see new patterns emerging.
Yeah, in fact, I think there was a quote that I also saw that kind of addressed that idea, which is like it's like tuning an instrument. I'm paraphrasing now, but it's like tuning an instrument. You have to kind of play all the instruments alongside each other to see if everything's in tune, because it's all relative to each other.
Excellent. That's an excellent way of thinking about it.
But yeah, it really comes down to, you want to get everything in your mind kind of out there and working, so that way they can actually rise and be refined together. I think that the later heroic feats and later feats that we've come up with, you can tell that they are in reaction, I think, to the way the game played versus being just about the gameplay. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but there's almost a more reactionary side to them. And I wonder if people who came in and read through the rules could tell which rules came later and which rules came earlier. It would be a fun challenge just to talk to another game designer and see if they can kind of sort out the evolution of the game just based on the way the rules are written.
Absolutely. I would love to have that conversation.
Yeah, it would be fun. Well, hopefully we'll be able to get find a game designer and have like a meeting of the minds like that between our games, and we'll get them on the show soon enough. I'm sure we're meeting quite a few people, and we actually got a teaser for next episode regarding a new game designer coming on and talking with us. But before we get to that, how about we just go over some key takeaways?
For sure. Absolutely. So number one, if it feels as though the game itself is dictating outcomes rather than being driven by player choice, your strategic options are likely out of balance. Second, variety matters. Too much of one thing can ruin the whole. Third, contrast can create a dynamic balance of play experiences. And last, test early and often while being cognizant of the impacts every change has on the system at large.
Yeah. And there was like quite a bit to unpack in this episode. So we would love for you to come to our Discord. And if you have questions about your game or other games you've played and you know how these topics can be approached, please join us and, you know, ask away.
Yeah, we're super happy to spend time with you. And honestly, you know, we're here to help you design your game. You know, we're not going to tell you what we think you should do, but we might ask you some questions that we think would be helpful in helping you discover what you already know you should do.
Yeah, 100%. Breaking news, Fortune Seekers. X Seekers of Fortune now has its pre-launch page live on Kickstarter. Click the link in the description below so you can be one of the first people to support X Seekers of Fortune. Also, there's probably going to be some bonuses if you support within the first 24 hours, so be on the lookout for those announcements coming soon. Thank you so much, Fortune Seekers. Please support the game, support the show by liking this episode and subscribing to our podcast. And you know what? Support each other. Back to the show. So, Danny, normally, you know, around this time of the episode, I kind of give over the reins to you. I think you said today might be particularly infuriating. So I'm looking forward to hearing about your something random.
Well, lucky for you, I came up with a better idea from when I last reported that I had an infuriating idea, although I think this will still be an interesting one. Okay. I hope. So I thought this time, since we're talking about balance, maybe we should play a game about balance. So in this game, you are going to do, this is, you know how it is. I like to do party game style stuff on the podcast because I think it plays well on the podcast.
Yeah, that's true.
So in this game, I'm going to give you our prompt and you are going to talk your way through it based on the prompt. And the twist here is that I'm going to be giving you two objectives that you have to balance in your communication of the scene. So a little bit of improv, and here we go. Are you ready?
No, but let's go ahead. Do I need to be standing up? You mentioned balance.
No.
Okay.
I would do that if we were in person. I definitely would have you do like a DUI test or something. This would not be what we're doing here.
Yeah, we definitely need to invest in like a corded microphone so we can move around.
I thought you were going to say a breathalyzer.
How high can it go? That sounds like a Patreon stretch or a stretch goal. How high can Joel blow a breathalyzer while still, being able to recite the alphabet?
We still need you, buddy. You're going to have to stick around a little longer.
Damn. Okay, let's go.
All right, here we go. Tell someone you never want to see them again, while also making sure that you get all the recipes for all of your favorite dishes that they used to make you.
That's the prompt, and I'm supposed to play the scene, I presume.
Yes.
Well, it sounds like this is going to be a little more dramatic, so why don't I get this up here? You know me, I'm a drama queen. Hey, I brought you out coffee today because I think we just need to have a talk, There's a lot that we want to take with us into the future, and there's other things that we have to leave behind, and the things that we want to take with us, it's knowledge, it's lessons, it's the food that we ate along the way. You have such a wealth of knowledge of, grandmother's recipes and just the greatest ways to mix and match your candies. And I just want to make sure that I can keep all of that with me in the very much likely case that we just, we go our separate ways. Whether that be today or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, it's going to be soon. But I just want you to know that I value your knowledge of food, and I want to preserve that and be the thing that I take from this relationship that we have had up until this point. So I got a little spiral here. Why don't you just get to writing? I'll just list off the things I really, really want. And, this will be the way that we preserve with each other. I might not always be there with you. In fact, I'll never be here with you again, but someday I'll eat these dishes and I'll think of you and how good it was to get you out of my life.
That was it. You accomplished the I'll never see you again. I think that was well done. Are you ready for the second one?
Yeah, I think so.
Ask someone out while letting them know you are really interested in really specific qualities dogs have.
What? Okay. I don't know. I just have a really good time, spending time with you. I really feel like there's like a connection here. So I would love to take you out sometime to maybe a dog park and just find out like what you really enjoy about, dogs and canines. Cause I think that's going to be that could be a big bridge that unites us. I don't want to say too much, but in the past people would ask others out to church and, make sure they aligned on those values. But the values that matter most to me are, do you think the dog's tail needs to be there? Or do you think it's cuter if it's been lopped off? You got to find that out because it is very important to me.
Okay. I better cut you off on that one before it gets any off and it goes off the rails. That was quite good.
That was like a minecart just like teetering over, just redistribute the weight. But I really like this game. This is my style. This is my kind of game.
Yeah. I'm trying to I think like if we played it in person, like the idea would be that the person you're talking to has to guess what the objectives were.
Yeah.
All right, here's the last one. You ready? Mm-hmm. Tell someone that a person that they love was lost at sea while trying to gain their empathy for a similar time when you lost your car.
Okay. Now that we're sitting down and you have something, to drink, I just need you to know that Frank just didn't come back with me from the trip. And, we were on that boat for so long and we were just having so much fun and we kind of went our separate ways. And I just thought I'd catch back up with him. But, it was like that other time, that I left my car, in the parking lot and then I went and shopped all day. And when I came back, I realized I didn't know where it was. And I got really concerned that I wouldn't see my Geo again. And, it's red and you just think you could see it from a mile away, but it's also tiny and it can very easily hide behind cars. And I thought that's what Frank, he's just so big and lovable. I just felt like I'm going to see him. I'm going to turn a corner and see him. And just like the car, you finally have to realize that it's gone. It fell overboard, I guess. I can only assume that he just fell off the side somewhere. Unlike my car, which I eventually did find, and I'm very happy about my luck. And it made me, I think I became a Christian that day.
Okay, we'll cut it off there. I think we've got it right there to the edge. Would you play that one again?
Smokes. Hell yes, I'd play that one again. I think we might have something here. Condolences, I think is the name of the game.
What is it called?
Condolences.
Condolences. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that would be really fun to play.
Yeah.
Oddly.
We need a party game, I think. I think it would really benefit us to have one, especially for other live shows. But now that we're less dramatic, let's go ahead and get back to the wide. No, hell yeah. That's, sometimes I feel like I'm tortured by your games, but, today this was a winner. I love this something random. Thumbs up.
Yeah, every now and then I get one accidentally that you enjoy. So,
all right. Well, with that, Danny, was there any other business to get to? Anything else on your mind before we get out of here?
no, I'm just trying to complete the speed run of a podcast so that Will is happy with us.
Well, I think we did a pretty darn good job. So Will, give us a rank. Why don't you go? Will, why don't you go into the iTunes store and review us? 5 out of 5 if we did a good job. But
We're getting a 1 star.
okay, well, before we completely lose all rank and get an angry comment, let me just say that Danny, you have been Danny.
I have.
And I have been Joel, and I'm here to
have.
Thank you. And I'm here to remind you that you must start somewhere. So why not here? Thanks for listening.
There's nicer places to start.
Theme music by James Hilden, produced and edited by William Wymore.